Mr Rattenbury.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. As I've touched on briefly in question time today, on Tuesday, Mrs Dunn asked me about two outstanding questions on notice. I can let Mrs Dunn know that question notice number 619 arrived in my office today, and it was submitted to the clerk just before question time during the lunch break. And the reason for the delay on that one was that the Directorate was seeking out additional information. And on question 604, I think I've probably explained the answer to that in my earlier response to Mrs Dunn today. That one will be replied to as soon as possible.
Thank you. Before I call other matters arising from question?
Just another matter, Madam Speaker.
Another
Very quickly, just want to move a leave of absence from Mrs Jones from today's sitting of the Assembly due to family reasons.
Question is Mrs Jones be given leave of absence today. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, I draw to your attention we have Mr Richard Mulcahy, former member of the Assembly here in the chamber. Welcome back. Did you enjoy question time, Mr Mulcahy? Yes. Thank you. Calling Ms Berry, Minister for Housing and Suburban Development. Ms Berry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Pursuant to section 43(2) of the City Renewal Authority and Suburban Land Agency Act 2017, I present a quarterly report on land acquisitions by the Suburban Land Agency for the period 1 July 2017 to 30 September 2017, and I ask leave to make a statement in relation to the paper.
Is leave granted? Thank you, Ms Berry. You're up early.
Thanks.
I said you're right.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In July this year, the ACT Government established the Suburban Land Agency under the City Renewal Authority and the Suburban Land Agency Act 2017. The Suburban Land Agency was established to deliver greenfield development and encourage and promote urban renewal outside the defined precinct of the City Renewal Authority. In accordance with the objects of the agency under the legislation, I provided the agency with authority to exercise its functions to ensure a mixture of public and private housing in new suburbs, increase the supply of affordable and community housing that meets or exceeds the affordable community and public housing targets set out under section 65 of the legislation, and carried out the development of land in a manner that is environmentally sustainable. To ensure greater transparency of the activities of the agency, I committed to creating an environment of clarity, openness and mirroring of community expectations. I've stated previously that the ACT Government's expectation is that the Suburban Land Agency meets its compliance and accountability requirements while effectively and efficiently delivering the Government's suburban renewal and land development agenda. To ensure that the Government has land available for development, acquisition of privately held leases of land is required from time to time to provide for future development, environmental offsets or other uses. As I have indicated previously, the Government is committed to providing certainty, transparency and consistency in the information that is provided that is required to inform acquisition decisions and ensure that these decisions are aligned with the Government's strategic plan for land management and development across the territory. I committed that as required by the legislation, I would present a report to the Legislative Assembly after the end of each quarter on any land acquired by the agency during that quarter, providing any valuations and any other information prescribed by the regulation. I've received the first quarterly report on land acquisitions from the Suburban Land Agency. During the reporting period, the agency purchased the lease of land for Block 1600 Belconnen on Stockdill Drive, Holt. The purchase of this land was settled on the 31st of July 2007 at a cost of $4.6 million. The Government identified blocks where a contract for the purchase of land existed at the commencement of the new agency in Schedule 2 of the transfer instrument issued by the Government on the 30th of June 2017. This is one of the blocks identified in that instrument. Madam Speaker, it is important to highlight that the assessment work and subsequent valuation for this purchase of the block was carried out in April 2017 and was done so under the instruction of officers of the Land Development Agency. The LDA Board agreed to purchase the block on the 25th of May 2017 in accordance with the Land Acquisition Policy Framework in force at the time, as exchange of contracts had occurred prior to the City Renewal Authority and Suburban Land Agency Act 2017 coming into effect. When the new Suburban Land Agency was established from the 1st of July 2017, settlement of that block was finalised. Madam Speaker, I commend the report to the Assembly.
Mr Gentleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I present the government response to a resolution of the Assembly of the 20th of September this year regarding aluminium composite cladding on government buildings, together with a report entitled Combustible Facade Cladding Preliminary Fire Safety Assessment and findings from the ACT Health Phase 1 internal audit on all healthcare facilities constructed since 2008. I ask leave to make a statement in relation to the paper.
Is leave granted? Mr Gentleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Acting Speaker, I table the report in response to the motion of the 20th of September, as I've said, on aluminium composite cladding. The report includes, firstly, an update on planning and works to remove and replace aluminium composite panels at the Centenary Hospital for Women and Children, a list of ACT Health buildings assessed for aluminium composite cladding and the findings of the ACT Health desktop audit, an update on the audit of the ACT government buildings, including findings to date, and a report on issues raised by the ACT government in 2009-10 relating to the non-compliant use of aluminium composite panels and how the ACT government ensures the fire safety of all buildings. Also table a copy of the report Combustible Facade Cladding Preliminary Fire Assessment, Safety Assessment, ACT Health Procurement and Capital Works Centenary Hospital for Women and Children, Garran, ACT CA 170095. Madam Assistant Speaker, as the report outlines, our highest priority to date is to work through the buildings that provide residential accommodation and buildings where it may be difficult for occupants to evacuate on their own, such as hospitals and schools. The report outlines that ACT Health has identified 5 additional buildings for further investigations and that there are other government buildings that do have ACPs. The whole of government working group is continuing to work through the implications of this type of cladding. The working group, along with the expert engineering advice, will assess the suitability of the use of ACP materials on all building types across the ACT government property portfolio. Where the use of ACP has been identified, current indications are that it's often used as an attachment or on buildings where it would pose a low risk. Work will be finalised to confirm the type and fire resistance of ACPs used on buildings and that the use and location of any ACPs does not pose a risk to occupants' safety in evacuating a building in a fire. Madam Assistant Speaker, when building ministers met early in October, we all agreed to use our laws and powers to help prevent the non-compliant use of combustible ACPs. And the report I'm tabling today outlines the ACT's building approval process and how combustible ACPs are treated under the process. This is a great example of how our laws and regulations continue to be applied to make sure ACPs are used appropriately in the Territory. I thank the members for their interest in this matter and look forward to providing further updates as the review progresses.
Mr Ramsey.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Speaker. Pursuant to subsection 61A(5) of the Judicial Commissions Act 1994, I present the 2016-17 annual report of the ACT Judicial Council.
Mr Rattenbury.
Madam Assistant Speaker, for the information of members, I present a revised explanatory statement for the Utilities Technical Regulation Amendment Bill 2017.
Mr Rattenbury.
Madam Assistant Speaker, for the information of members, I present a corrigendum to the ACT Human Rights Commission 2016-17 annual report, which was presented to the Assembly pursuant to section 13 of the Annual Reports Government Agencies Act 2004.
Mr Rattenbury.
Thank you again. For the information of members, I present an implementation status report on the ACT Government's climate change policy, and I ask leave to make a statement in relation to the paper.
Is leave granted? Mr Rattenbury.
Thank you. Colleagues, I am pleased to table the second implementation status report on ACT Government Climate Change Policy Action Plan 2, prepared by the Office of the Commissioner for Sustainability and the Environment. To maintain accountability and transparency, every 3 years the Government invites this independent audit of government action on climate change and presents the findings to the Assembly. The first implementation status report was tabled at the beginning of 2015 and looked at the progress of actions of Action Plan 2 between 2012 and 2014. That report presented the Government with 15 challenges and opportunities to improve climate change mitigation and adaptation activities. Since that time, I am delighted to advise the Assembly that all of the challenges and opportunities to improve have been adopted by Government. Improvements have been made to the way we gather and report on energy use data. For instance, the ACT Government now produces an up-to-date inventory report at the end of each calendar year, covering the previous financial year. By doing this, we ensure greater transparency and accountability in emissions reporting and have a substantially better understanding of the immediate effects of mitigation actions on the Territory's emissions and our progress towards the target of 40% emissions reductions by the year 2020. With the release of the ACT Climate Change Adaptation Strategy in 2016, the Government can now demonstrate how we're coordinating our actions to help the ACT community and the Government to adapt to a changing climate. We also measure ourselves against global standards to ensure that our climate change policies reflect international best practice and report frequently to the community on the implementation of government action on climate change. In February this year, I invited the Office to audit and report by the 30th of September 2017 on the status of actions under Action Plan 2. The Office would define whether actions are completed, ongoing, modified or subsumed through separate policy mechanisms. The Office would also report on how the Territory is tracking on greenhouse gas emissions reduction and towards our greenhouse gas reduction targets. I received a copy of this report on the 15th of September 2017 and under Section 21 of the Commissioner for Sustainability and the Environment Act 1993, as the responsible Minister, I am tabling this report within the required 6 sitting days. The audit found that, and I quote, the ACT Government's continued commitment to addressing climate change has ensured the implementation of the 18 actions. It acknowledges the complexity of a number of actions and determined that 6 actions are completed, 8 are ongoing, 1 has been modified and 1 has been subsumed by other work. The Office added a 5th status category to those requested in the terms of reference, the category of concern. The report identifies 2 actions as being of concern: Action 3, Energy Efficiency Information to Tenants, and Action 5, Community Engagement Strategy. The Office has provided suggestions on how these actions may be modified to address the issues of energy efficiency in rental homes and communication between the ACT Government and members of the community whom we serve. We will consider these suggestions in the development of our future climate change policies. I am delighted with the outcome of this audit and thank the Commissioner and her Office for the hard work involved in preparing the implementation status report. I would also like to thank the local experts who contributed their knowledge to the expert commentary and case studies that are also published within the report. We are proud to have so many experts residing and working in the Canberra region and to be able to showcase their work in the Commissioner's document. I'm very pleased with the achievements made through the implementation of AP2 since its release in 2012. I will present to the Assembly a Government Statement of Response to the 17 recommendations of this report in early 2018. I look forward to continuing to update the Assembly on how the ACT can continue to embrace the challenge of climate change and, through action, demonstrate ongoing leadership to communities locally, nationally and internationally. Madam Speaker, I commend the 2017 Implementation Status Report on ACT Government's climate change policy to the Assembly.
Ms Stephen-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Speaker. Pursuant to Section 71 of the Working with Vulnerable People Background Checking Act 2011, I present a legislative review of the Act. I ask leave to make a statement in relation to the paper.
Is leave granted? Ms Stephen-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Speaker, and thank you, Mr Hanson. I am pleased to table the report of the first legislative review of the Working with Vulnerable People Background Checking Act 2011. In tabling this review, the Government meets its legislative requirement to undertake and table a legislative review of the Act following the midpoint of its implementation period. This first legislative review of the Act provides an opportunity to examine and improve the effectiveness of the Act and its administration through the Working with Vulnerable People scheme. The Act aims to reduce the risk of harm or neglect to vulnerable people in the ACT. It requires those who work or volunteer with vulnerable people, including children, to have a background check and be registered under the scheme. The exclusion of people with a known history of certain behaviour is a fundamental part of creating safe environments for vulnerable people. The premise of background checking under the Act is that the past behaviour of an individual can provide an indication of the possible future behaviour of that individual. Examples or patterns of abusive or inappropriate behaviour can sometimes be evident in information available for assessment, which includes an individual's criminal record. This information is used to undertake a risk assessment which informs whether an applicant can be registered under the scheme. Since the commencement of the scheme in November 2012, there have been more than 140,000 registrations issued by Access Canberra, with approximately 95,000 current registrations. This is more than double the initial forecast total of 42,000 registrations over the 6-year implementation. Feedback and operational experience suggests that employers have adopted a blanket approach requiring all employees and volunteers to register regardless of their role in the organisation. The comprehensive nature of this scheme makes it a key component of the suite of protective mechanisms put in place by the ACT Government to protect children and vulnerable people. This scheme is in addition to the recently established Reportable Conduct Scheme, fit and proper person checks, accreditation and registration. Madam Assistant Speaker, the terms of reference for the legislative review required the following issues to be considered: whether the operation of the Act was fit for purpose, whether the scope of the scheme is appropriate and the regulatory burden is proportionate for protecting vulnerable people, the resources allocated to administer the Act are sufficient for the scheme to operate appropriately, and whether amendments to the Act are needed to improve its operation and administration. Another key consideration of the review has been to respond to the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse Working with Children Checks report. Key recommendations coming out of the Royal Commission's work is for jurisdictions to harmonise their approach to working with children checks. The ACT has been engaging with all jurisdictions to progress this work. Increased information sharing between jurisdictions. Sorry, Madam Speaker. Madam Assistant Speaker.
Mr. Assistant Speaker.
Sorry, looking down. Mr. Assistant Speaker. The ACT has been engaging with all jurisdictions to progress this work. Increased information sharing between jurisdictions is an important first step towards harmonisation. Current legislation prevents information sharing between jurisdictions, and the Legislative Review has recommended to proceed with changes to the Act to enable the development of cross-jurisdictional information sharing provisions. The recommendation to enable the Act to share information will prepare the Territory for a national approach to sharing and receiving information in relation to background checks for children, noting the ACT scheme has a broader remit for vulnerable people. Many of the recommendations of this legislative review position the ACT to deliver on the Royal Commission's recommendations where no national agreement is required. These changes will be pursued, noting that information sharing will be enabled once a governance protocol is developed that reflects agreed arrangements between jurisdictions. National harmonisation of working with children checks requires national agreement, and changes to the Act will be required in the future. These further changes will be brought forward as part of the second legislative review required under the Act following its 7th year of operation. The review was overseen by an inter-directorate committee comprising the Community Services Directorate, Access Canberra and the Health, Education, Justice and Community Safety and Chief Minister, Treasury and Economic Development Directorates. Community and stakeholder engagement was undertaken to inform the legislative review. The Nous Group was engaged to conduct a series of stakeholder consultations and a subsequent targeted survey distributed via peak organisations. This was undertaken to elicit further feedback from the business community and from vulnerable people and their carers. The findings and issues identified as part of the stakeholder consultation have informed the recommendations of the legislative review. Mr. Assistant Speaker, there are 26 recommendations for legislative amendments proposed in this review across 5 themes. These themes are increasing protections for vulnerable people, strengthening information sharing capabilities, relieving administrative burden to employers and Access Canberra, strengthening compliance and monitoring, and risk assessment guidelines and definitions. A key recommendation of the review is the extension of the registration period from 3 years to 5 years. Implemented in conjunction with increased compliance measures, this recommendation would maintain protections for vulnerable people while significantly reducing the regulatory and administrative burden on applicants, people registered under the scheme, employers and Access Canberra. This proposed change would make the scheme consistent with New South Wales and Victoria, which have recently extended their registration period for working with children checks to 5 years, and will assist in the national work towards harmonisation of working with children check schemes as recommended by the Royal Commission. Throughout the drafting of amended legislation and development of an implementation plan to progress this recommendation, further work with Access Canberra will be required to examine the additional safeguards needed to underpin the extension of the registration period to 5 years. This work will also include ongoing discussions with ACT Policing, Justice and Community Safety Directorate, the Human Rights Commission and the ACT Law Courts to examine the potential to achieve live monitoring safeguards. The second major recommendation proposed in the legislative review is the introduction of disqualifying offences. This is a key measure aimed at increasing safeguards for the protection of vulnerable people by seeking to exclude people with relevant and serious criminal history from the scheme automatically. This recommendation will position the ACT well in relation to national harmonisation of working with children check schemes and provide a greater level of protection to vulnerable people. Importantly, the ACT Government will continue to engage with the Human Rights Commission to examine the potential human rights implications and ensure there are no unintended consequences from this recommendation. It is important to acknowledge that Access Canberra, which has responsibility for the administration of the scheme, is a key stakeholder in relation to the recommendations contained in this legislative review. Access Canberra has agreed in principle to undertake an operational review of risk assessment and scheme guidelines subject to consideration as part of the 2018-19 budget process to ensure alignment of the scheme's administration with the revised regulatory framework. The remaining recommendations put forward in the legislative review are administrative and seek to improve the operational efficiency of the scheme, improve information sharing within the ACT and with other jurisdictions, and reduce regulatory burden on applicants and employers. Madam Assistant Speaker, the Act forms an important part of the Government's commitment to community safety by legislating to protect vulnerable people. We must continue to review and adapt our approaches to ensure we have the best measures in place to continue to protect children and vulnerable people from the risk of sexual, physical, emotional or financial harm or neglect. I'm pleased to table the first legislative review of the Working with Vulnerable People Background Checking Act 2011 today and look forward to bringing forward amended legislation based on its findings in due course.
I have received letters from Ms Chain, Ms Cody, Mrs Dunn, Ms Lakuta, Ms Lee, Ms Orr, Mr Parton and Mr Steele proposing that matters of public importance be submitted to the Assembly. In accordance with Standing Order 79, I have determined that the matter proposed by Mr Parton be submitted to the Assembly, namely, the importance of having good public transport for all areas of Canberra. Mr Parton.
Thank you, Madam Acting Speaker, at least. I rise to speak on this matter of public importance, the importance of good public transport for all areas of Canberra. Now, Madam Acting Speaker, when I Assistant Speaker, yeah, okay, I'm sorry. When I ride the bus in this town, and the feedback that I get from constituents who ride the bus is that by and large, if you are going from town centre to town centre, the service provided is more than adequate. And that's good. That's good. That's what we want. If I want to get a bus from here to Tuggeranong Town Centre, ideally I'd stroll out, catch the 314 or the 315, I think, and that's just here on London Circuit, and I can do that pretty much every 10 minutes of the day, and it'll take me about 50 minutes. That's a winner. That's good. I do note that there have been some further improvements in the rapid network, and again, I think that's exceptional. Where the problem arises is the inter-suburban travel, and certainly the feedback that I'm getting from constituents, there are some big shortfalls in our transport system in that area. You know, I dare say on a number of fronts, some things here that the Minister has heard time and time again, but we're here to just mention them again. That the great problems in public transport planning seem to be in the area of suburban links. Now, this came up, in fact, during evidence in a recent committee hearing into ACT cemeteries, and the point was made that if you live in the Lanyon Valley and you have a loved one buried at Gungahlin Cemetery, if you don't have access to a car, your journey to Mitchell will be long and arduous. Leaving already, Mr Hanson?
His bus is arriving.
You already made the cut.
When I punched the journey into my phone this morning, the first option it gave me, and we plucked an address out of the blue, I think on Harry Hopman Circuit at Gordon. So we had a 300-metre walk to Noak Avenue before catching the 18 to Lanyon Marketplace, the 313 to City Bus Station, and then the 56 to Sanford Street before walking for over 1 kilometre uphill to the cemetery. Whole journey, 2 hours and 3 minutes. So we're talking in theory about a 4-hour round trip to visit your loved one buried in your own home city. And I don't know if that works for me. I don't know. That seems a bit big. And don't anyone believe for a single moment that the gold-plated $1 billion light rail line to Gungahlin is going to make any difference at all to that journey. As has been exceptionally well publicised, there is no stop in Mitchell. The recent changes made to timetables have not assisted. In fact, what I'm hearing is that for many individuals, these changes have made bus travel much more difficult. And look, I ride the bus from time to time. I don't ride it often, and so I have to take the feedback that I'm getting from constituents as being what's going on. Alice wrote to me from Bonython to say that the only positive from the bus timetable changes was that it had finally motivated her 18-year-old son to get off his backside and get his licence. Why? Because the new timetable would add hours each week of bus travel time for him to get to his part-time job at Lanyon, that he had on a number of occasions chosen to walk because it was quicker than taking the bus. And it's quite a walk from Bonython to Lanyon. Now, when the Minister gave her ministerial statement on this topic this morning, she talked about the government encouraging more active travel. I don't think that's what she was talking about. I don't think she was talking about making the bus trip so unviable that it forces people to walk. I heard from James in Caldwell, who had this to say, and I'll quote him directly: "Mark, can you please get a response from the Minister on how they can justify students' travel time from Caldwell on weekday afternoons have doubled," says James. And I must confess, I haven't passed this on to the Minister's office. This is the first time, so I'll provide some information. For example, my 3 children catch the 71 northbound from Caldwell to Erindale at approximately 3:30, school finish at 3:05. So 3:05 school finish, they catch the 71 at 3:30. They then have to wait until 4:25 for the connecting 64. So this equates to nearly 1.5 hours to get home. Prior to the timetable change, children were home within 30 to 35 minutes. How can the Minister justify this mess, says James, and reduce services during what would be classed as peak time and a trip that by car is no more than 11 minutes? So, look, we're getting some feedback, and the overwhelming feedback that we're getting from constituents is that this latest round of changes to the bus network is making their lives more difficult rather than working on a single direct bus. The new network forces more transfers, and we just don't think commuters should have to continually change buses and modes of transport to make a simple journey or have their journey time unreasonably extended. This government believes it has a mandate to do anything. That's what it seems, that they don't have to consult, they don't have to comply with parliamentary conventions, they don't have to comply with planning guidelines, and they certainly don't have to talk to people about bus routes. Canberra Liberals took to the 2016 election a comprehensive transport policy underscored by the principle of putting the passenger first, and I get the impression that the vast majority of the focus from the other side in this entire transport space is on the massive infrastructure spend and the massive project that we're seeing unfold down Northbourne Avenue and Flemington Road and beyond. And I can tell you that that particular project won't help the people of Oaks Estate. Did someone mention Oaks Estate? Have a go at catching a bus to Oaks Estate, an action bus. Oaks Estate advocate Hugh Griffin has been making some extremely valid points when it comes to public transport. He again highlighted the government's complete disregard for Oaks Estate in his submission to the recent Housing and Homelessness Summit. He points out that Oaks Estate is the poorest community in the ACT with 54% of public housing compared to an ACT average of 7%. Car ownership is low, with the proportion of households without any car over 4 times higher than the ACT average. Despite this, there is no action bus. So I look forward to hearing what other members of both sides of this chamber have to say about this subject that is so important to so many of my constituents.
Ms Lee.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Speaker, and I thank my colleague Mr Parton for bringing on this MPI for debate today on the importance of having good public transport for all areas of Canberra. That I rise today to speak on this topic will probably come as no surprise to this government and in particular to the Minister, as it is an issue I've been very concerned about as a result of the new timetable. Mr Parton has already pointed out the lack of services in his electorate of Brindabella and also the absence of any services, including public transport, for an area in my own electorate of Kurrajong. I refer, of course, to Oaks Estate, which gets forgotten regularly, not least because it has been presumed to be in New South Wales by one or more government members. Many constituents have raised various concerns with me about public transport, but given my 10-minute time limit, I talk about the cancellation of the number 5 bus, which is having a huge impact on the residents of Narrabundah. The first that many residents knew of the impending cancellation of this service was when my team letterboxed households in the affected areas. I received a huge response. In fact, Madam Assistant Speaker, the biggest response I have had on any issue since I have been an elected member, and even a request from Labor member for Canberra, Gai Brockman's office, to explain what was going on because she had also received numerous complaints about the cancellation of this service. And I just want to read out some of the comments I received. From one resident: firstly, thank you for your notification by mail advising of the cancellation of bus number 5. I am writing with deep concern to the proposed discontinuation of the Narrabundah bus number 5 as at 9th of October. I live opposite the bus stop on Kutara Crescent and know how many people utilise that bus, including a Down syndrome boy who lives in a community group house in Nimbin Street, and he has caught that bus into Civic daily for the last 25 years to work at Kumari. There are a lot of elderly people in my street that depend on that bus and are used to the current route. I am appalled at this decision. The government encourages people to use buses instead of their own cars, for those who have one, and then makes ridiculous decisions which make it more difficult for people to get from A to B. Canberra already has a terrible transport system, so why make it worse? There does not appear to have been any consultation between the Minister and the Narrabundah community, and quite frankly, I am furious about it. My land rates have gone up extensively over the past couple of years, and I know this is partly to fund the light rail, which only benefits the residents of Gungahlin in its first stage. Then to have our bus discontinued is unbelievable. And another: thank you for your concern and efforts relating to the changing bus routes in Narrabundah. Your approach is in sharp contrast to the Chief Minister's dismissive attitude to this issue during his most recent talkback session on ABC Canberra Radio. My husband and I have lived in Narrabundah for the last 20 years. This area was specifically chosen because as non-drivers we have to rely on public transport for work, shopping and leisure. Our closest bus stop is at Kutara and Kiera, which gives us, for the next 10 days, all sorts of options and possibilities which cover most of our transport needs and wants. The greatest problem with the new service will be the lack of a direct bus route to and from Woden, which for many Narrabundah locals is the only larger shopping centre accessible by public transport. Suggesting that a possible 30-minute wait for a connecting bus is improving the service is somewhat close to Winston Churchill's, quote, terminological inaptitude, end quote. Imagine doing that with heavy shopping, a pram or a walking frame in the rain or heat. And Madam Assistant Speaker, another: I'm new to Griffith and just started catching the number 5 bus to Russell, only for the service to disappear days later. The letter you sent out regarding the changes to the bus timetable certainly struck a chord with me, as the new routes 4 and 6 certainly won't work. My commute time has gone from 15 to 20 minutes to 35 to 40 minutes and now involves swapping buses or a very long walk despite a reasonably short distance to work. I have abandoned catching the bus on this basis. Is there anything that can be done to voice concerns and request reinstatement of previous service? And another: thank you for your letter to Narrabundah residents regarding changes to bus routes. I am dismayed to learn that the ACT Labor government has decided to cancel Action Bus Route 5 and Weekend Route 938. I ask you to do whatever you can to encourage them to revoke this decision. The buses servicing Narrabundah are a vital part of the daily lives of the 2 adolescents living in my house. They are active young people who rely on the bus network to lead fulfilling lives. I have been a resident of the ACT for 34 years and have watched it grow and develop with a mixture of pride and sadness. At the same time that the government is opening the inner suburbs to higher density development, it is cutting essential bus services. Downgrading transport options for Narrabundah residents is inconsistent with the objective of accommodating denser housing while protecting the environment. And it is a decision that directly impacts the young, the disadvantaged and the frail elderly in the inner south. Thank you for supporting the community. And from the Old Narrabundah Community Council, who wrote to the Minister saying, inter alia, we have a high percentage of both ACT housing and community housing properties in our area, 30% and rising, providing homes for our most vulnerable. We are concerned that the ACT government is restricting access for Narrabundah residents to the rapid Route 6, impacting on residents' access to essential services like physiotherapy, podiatry, scans, blood tests, substance addiction rehabilitation and mental health support. Since the ONCC was formed, we have not fielded as many complaints and cries for help as we have received in the last month over the cancellation of Route 5. We have heard from some families with small children that will now have to purchase a second car to enable them to get to work on time. We have a severely disabled full-time resident of a care home who will now need many hours of re-education to be able to access his job in Russell. This has caused much distress for his elderly mother and carers in the home. And, Madam Assistant Speaker, from a notice I saw taped up on the window at a cafe at the Narrabundah shops, which says, quote, if you don't want our public transport cut off, email the Minister, end quote. And these are only a handful of the feedback that I have received from constituents. There are, of course, many, many more. When I asked the Minister in question time on 13 September about what consultation had been undertaken with bus patrons prior to unilaterally cancelling the service, her response was, and I quote, information is being made available to residents now. First, let us not forget the countless residents who have said the first they heard about the cancellation of the service was through the letterboxing efforts of my team. So I'm not sure they will agree with the Minister's claims that the information is indeed being made available to the residents now. Second, I'm not sure that simply telling residents what they have lost constitutes consultation, and certainly telling them when the government already decided to cut the service does not do much to make my constituents feel valued or that their transport needs are being met. Third, despite these concerns being raised time and time again, and the Minister cannot deny these have not been raised with her, as I have been CC'd in on just some of the complaints made to her office, she has failed to accept that perhaps the government got it wrong, that perhaps she should have consulted with patrons, that perhaps she should have done better. Time and time again, the Minister has steadfastly said nothing but repeat how awesome the changes are, how beneficial the changes are for all Canberrans. This flies in the face of numerous constituents who have pleaded with me to do something to get the Minister to listen. And only yesterday, the Minister boldly stated, quote, we are delivering a complete redesign of our bus network to deliver a faster and easier 7-day-a-week service for everyone in Canberra. And, quote, one of the major improvements to the 2018 network will be increased frequency and better connections so that Canberrans will be able to just turn up at a bus stop and go where they need to. End quote. I have to ask, Minister, can you look a Narrabundah resident in the eye and say that? Perhaps if you live in Gungahlin or along the tram tracks and close to a tram stop and only want to go to another tram stop, you'll be satisfied with what the government is delivering for you. But, as we have heard from Mr Parton, for many residents in Tuggeranong, public transport isn't working. And, as I'm sure, if Mrs Kickett gets a chance, what you'll hear is that for many residents in Belconnen, public transport isn't working. And for many residents in the inner south, public transport is not working. I thank Mr Parton for bringing this MPI today. It is an important issue and one that the Canberra Liberals will continue to advocate for.
Ms Fitzharris.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Speaker. And I too would like to thank Mr Parton for bringing forward this matter of public importance today, because indeed, as has been discussed on many occasions in this chamber and indeed across the community, better public transport in Canberra is something that is important to many. As Mr Parton knows, the ACT Government is making significant investments in Canberra's future transport network to support our growing city. These investments will help to consolidate the move towards an integrated transport network and achieve the government's vision of a compact, connected and competitive and sustainable city. The benefits of integrated public transport for our community are substantial and go well beyond getting a person from A to B. It includes social inclusion, driving economic development, maintaining livability and, of course, reducing congestion and carbon emissions. An integrated public transport network also makes it easier for Canberrans to take more active transport options between work and home and opportunities for incidental exercise. Linking residential development with areas of employment, retail and entertainment helps build mixed-use precincts and a sense of place for our community. Indeed, it brings people together. Madam Assistant Speaker, as you know, last year the Labor government established Transport Canberra with a clear mandate to deliver the ACT government's vision of a quality public transport system. Of course, the first stage of light rail will free up 1 million bus kilometres, and we are putting these to work to deliver a faster and easier public transport network that will reduce congestion and protect our livability as our city grows. Transport Canberra introduced a new bus network earlier this month, Mr Assistant Speaker, and many comments have been made which I will respond to in just a moment. The network change is the first of a series of improvements toward us developing an integrated public transport system and delivering that for the nation's capital. We have altered some of those peak time services to allow for considerable roadworks across our city and improve bus frequency and allow for a better journey for passengers. Mr Assistant Speaker, comments have been made indeed about the October changes. I note, of course, that some of those comments, of course, did not for a moment from the opposition mention services in your electorate, Mr Assistant Speaker, in particular, of course, the Green Rapid. The first time there has been a third rapid route providing public transport in Canberra. Of course, it goes indeed through the inner south and into the city. And, of course, the Black Rapid, the first rapid service between Belconnen and Gungahlin. In response to those changes for Narrabundah residents, Ms Lee is incorrect. I have said on a number of occasions, including in emails I have responded to from people that I know have emailed many members of this Assembly regarding the changes. I have acknowledged that such a service change will have an impact, and I think we could have done a better job on communicating those, Mr Assistant Speaker. Perhaps one of the reasons some Narrabundah residents were so confused was because of some of the other information they were receiving in addition to that provided by Transport Canberra. I mean, Ms Lee noted in her comments indeed about the lack of services along Kutara Crescent. If she has looked indeed at the new network, she will see that Route 4 does indeed capture Kutara Crescent. So I guess in hindsight, rather than referring to the cancellation of Route 5, we should have instead done a better effort to inform Narrabundah residents that indeed they were getting an upgraded Route 4 and an upgraded Route 6 as new services in their suburb, and it provides increased frequency in Narrabundah and, of course, significantly increased connections. We continue to look at ways that we can inform the Narrabundah community about the changes to them. Indeed, it has been a service that many people have been used to for some time with the Route 5. For many residents, the services, including those on Kutara Crescent, where there indeed is a bus service provided, there has been very little change to their service. There remains a bus service along Kutara Crescent. So I note that Ms Lee mentioned that in her previous comments. And certainly there has been significant information provided to Narrabundah residents, and as I say and as I have said in many of the correspondences that I have received, we will continue to work with the Narrabundah community about the changes and how they have affected them. Indeed, I would also note that I have received a number of messages as well, Mr Assistant Speaker, of gratitude and thanks for the introduction of the Green Rapid, including from a number of residents of Narrabundah and what I know locals call Old Narrabundah as well. So, Mr Assistant Speaker, I think the opposition are inclined to, of course, as is their job, and to let us know of the concerns in the community. They may not as often receive those more congratulatory messages that the government does receive. I certainly acknowledge that any network change does bring change, and if we can learn anything from this, it is particularly in suburbs where there has been a service for a considerable period of time that we can do a better job. Indeed, last week in opening the Dixon bus interchange, I was extremely pleased to announce that the 9 rapid services that the government took to the election. I noted Mr Parton spoke of a comprehensive public transport plan that the opposition took to last year's election. Well, I would argue, and I think most Canberrans would argue, that indeed was not a comprehensive plan. It did include a number of rapid bus services, which I thought was a tremendous improvement on any previous Canberra Liberals transport plan, apart, of course, from Mrs Dunn's obviously past keen support for light rail, but it also did not provide any costings, any information on how it would be delivered, and that wonderful achievement of an 8-lane concrete highway along Northbourne Avenue, which, if the opposition were in government today, we would not be seeing work along Northbourne Avenue to deliver a beautiful public transport system. We would see them struggling to pay for the $200 to $300 million bill that they would have had to have paid to Canberra Metro to tear up that contract, not least continued ongoing congestion on Canberra's busiest road. So I certainly welcomed the Canberra Liberals. I certainly welcomed the Canberra Liberals' recognition, and I think what was probably a step forward for them, that Canberra can be a city for public transport, that their view has changed, that Canberra is not just a city built for the car, but is a city for public transport, where public transport indeed is working now and will work even better in the future. And one of the reasons it will work even better in the future, Mr Assistant Speaker, is because not only will Labor deliver the 9 rapid public transport routes across the city, it will deliver them 2 years ahead of schedule. 2 years ahead of schedule, which I think is a remarkable achievement, and I thank indeed all of those people in Transport Canberra who worked very hard to work with the government to find a way not only to deliver those services but to deliver them 2 years ahead of schedule. And Mr Parton, you'll be pleased to know that there will then be 2 rapid services from your electorate, taking along both the east and western parts. So if you're looking a bit puzzled over there, Mr Parton, so if you haven't yet seen the new rapid network, I will indeed find a way to drop a copy off to your office, but Canberrans right across the territory will see a rapid bus or indeed a light rail route near them. We always said that Labor's commitment was to deliver better public transport no matter where you live in Canberra, and we're going to do that 2 years ahead of time. In the very near future, in fact, in the next week or so, I look forward to opening a public consultation in a first stage of the new rapid network. What we will be seeking in that stage is Canberrans' views on how they would best like to connect to our rapid network. Indeed, it will be, as Ms Lee noted, and quoted from me, a rapid network is one where you can just turn up at a bus stop or a light rail stop and there will be a service for you within 15 minutes, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m, Monday to Friday, as well as increased frequencies of those exact same routes with the exact same numbers on the weekend. The consultation that the government did with the Canberra community last year clearly showed Canberrans wanted simple timetables, they wanted faster travel between destinations, and they wanted a simplified network. So we look forward to opening that first stage of consultation on how Canberrans would best like to connect to the rapid network, and then early next year we will take the results of that consultation, open stage 2 of the consultations, which will more specifically look at each of the local services connecting to the rapid bus routes. Of course, I could talk extensively about the light rail project, but I know that it is very clear that work is well underway. I was thrilled today to join 3 University of New South Wales second-year engineering students who are getting hands-on real-life experience on the light rail project with Canberra Metro as we speak. They've been doing it a couple of days a week for a few months, and they're going to be working full-time on this project with engineers with world-class experience, just another part of the project of light rail that is bringing so many benefits to our city. And I could talk more on active travel. I know Mr Parton's got a keen interest in that, but I thank you, Mr Parton, for bringing this motion forward.
Sorry?
Ms Cody.
Thank you, Mr Assistant Speaker. Thank you, Mr Parton. What a fantastic matter of public importance. Public transport for Canberra. keen advocate to ensure that Canberra has some of the best public transport. And I know that Ms Fitzharris has just finished saying we are delivering. We are delivering. I spoke about this yesterday in my motion. Public transport across Canberra has improved dramatically. As I've said numerous times before, I grew up in this city and I remember the old Woden bus interchange was pretty run down and pretty ordinary, and had to spend many a time getting there. Growing up in Canberra, Woden was our closest shopping centre, and it would take about 45, 50, sometimes an hour and a half to get from Canberra to Woden. Now, that's an awfully long time. I think now you can do it in about 15 minutes on a bus. That's pretty good. Maybe 20, maybe half an hour on a weekend to get from Canberra to Woden. Doesn't take very long. I'd like to thank Mr Parton, though, for all of the positive information he provided about our wonderful Canberra Public Transport Network. Mr Parton has been really positive on what has been a somewhat negative opposition this week in a lot of what the government has been delivering. So it was really, really lovely to hear some great positive stories about particularly the rapid transport services, but public transport in Canberra in general. I know that you were with me, Mr Assistant Speaker, over the weekend when we were approached by many residents in the new Molonglo suburbs who could not thank the government enough for the wonderful new bus services that have made life so much easier for them. Getting from the Molonglo Valley into the city and to Barton has become a much easier option on a bus for many residents. And I know that, as I said, Mr Assistant Speaker, you too were given that same feedback over the weekend, and it was really encouraging. It's really great that we're working so closely by having the Transport Canberra and the City Services portfolio in the one grouping, having the one minister responsible for both areas. Public transport in this city can't happen on its own. It needs to be planned out well, and it needs to be included in some of the new design and work that goes along with road maintenance and with the ability to ensure that our new suburbs flourish. And, you know, we've seen that. We've seen that a lot over the last little while. Like Minister Fitzharris, light rail, you know, great. And I was really pleased to just hear her talk about the new engineering students that have joined from the University of New South Wales. I've been lucky enough to meet with Engineers Australia on numerous occasions, and to offer students the ability to work on such a groundbreaking infrastructure project here in Canberra is just fantastic. So I, you know, applaud the government for doing that. That's just wonderful. And to be able to ensure that light rail is delivered to our area in Woden, which will help people from further south in the Tuggeranong suburbs make their travel to the city and Belconnen and Gungahlin much more reliable, faster and economical. Now, I was really pleased just then to hear about Minister Fitzharris saying we're delivering the rapid transport 2 years ahead of schedule, because I've got in my notes here that we agree that light rail will probably free up a number of buses, and that's going to be fantastic because that's just going to improve our bus network. But we haven't been forced to wait. The new buses are here, they're doing their job. We've had new buses arrive, we've had new services introduced. You know, we've got the green rapid, the black rapid, the extended blue rapid to Lanyon Marketplace, the red rapid running all weekend, and is bringing frequency down to every 15 minutes. Pretty good. The service improvement on the Western Line has just been phenomenal. We've seen patronage increase by 23%. And that's including the extension out to Denman Prospect. So 23% is nothing to be sneezed at. getting less people off the road in cars, making it better for our environment and a much faster way to travel. So overall, this month, patronage is up by 3%. Now, I know 3% doesn't sound like much to some, but that's still an increase. 3%. Nothing to be sneezed at. So what that means is that we've gone from, now I'm going to have to take my glasses off so I can read this because it's a big number, 17,767,194 boardings in 2013-14 to being on track for 18.4 million boardings this year. 18.4 million. That's a pretty impressive number of people boarding buses in the ACT. So it's great to see. Look, I also just wanted to talk about the frequency of the buses and the ease of catching them. I've caught buses a few times to and from work, and it's been wonderful to see. Today, actually, I witnessed a group of people got together in Dixon. They jumped on a bus. There you go, Mr. Parton, friends of yours. They jumped on a bus. They came down here to the city, to the Assembly, it turns out. They had a bit of they wanted to talk to one of our Assembly colleagues who's not actually here at the moment. So anyway, he didn't appear out there either. It was just really interesting because they made it down here. They had a bit of a show out the front, I believe. They then jumped back on the bus, headed back up Northbourne Avenue to Dixon, and did all of that in their lunch break. So these are private industry workers that don't get long lunch breaks like some others can and do. So they have a very limited time for their lunch break, and they manage to get on bus in Dixon, come down to the Assembly, do their business, get on a bus, be back in Dixon, have some lunch, and be back at work in their prescribed lunch break. Now, I reckon that's a pretty efficient public transport system. I also just wanted to pay tribute to everyone that works to deliver our public transport network. It's quite an impressive list of people. We have the drivers, which we all know we couldn't get from A to B without them because they drive the bus. They're wonderful. They have great working conditions. They are happy, healthy, and safe working environment, which makes for happy bus drivers. Now, the TWU work really hard to advocate for our drivers here in Canberra, and it's really great to ensure that by providing happy, safe, and effective working conditions, provides us with happy, safe bus drivers, which then means that when you get on the bus, you get a happy bus driver. It makes your patronage much more fun. So, once again, I'd just like to thank Mr Parton for bringing this matter forward, because it is really important to ensure that Canberra has a great public transport network, which the government is delivering on and is working to improve on by providing infrastructure like light rail. But also, it's really important for us to stand here and thank Mr Parton again for being so positive in some of the earlier comments he was making about the current bus routes. I know that in this job it is a little harder to catch a bus than we'd all like, but I'm sure that every chance we get, there's a number of members in this place that do get on a bus. I know Ms Lakuta often catches buses, Mr Gentleman, Mr Parton even said he does, Ms Fitzharris, Ms Chain. I've even gotten on a bus every so often, I know, right? There you go. So there's many members of this place that get on buses, and I encourage more people, both in the public and in the chamber, to catch our wonderful public transport. Thank you.
Ms Lakuta.
Thank you, Mr Assistant Speaker, and of course I must thank Mr Parton for bringing on this MPI, and it's great as always to have a discussion about public transport in Canberra, and it's really great to have such a positive discussion on the basis that we want more of it. I mean, that would be the universal message, I think, of everybody who has spoken today. We would like, it's great and we want more. Before I go on a bit more about Canberra stuff, I'd first like to bring to the Assembly's attention a Facebook group that transport and urban planning nerds, like my office manager, seem to spend too much time of their personal time on: new urbanist memes for transit-oriented teens. So if you're interested in reading about what thousands of 20-something-year-olds whining about the finer points of bus station design go to, this is the place. But if you're new urbanist memes for transit-orientated teens. It has been recommended to me by my office manager. Yes. When governments, however, develop public transport plans, they can't take it all from the Facebook, I'm afraid. The biggest struggle everywhere is to reconcile the inherent coverage between covering everybody so that there is some service, some time, and quality, fastness of service. When you're faced with limited resources, as government always is, you inevitably have to choose between a public transport system that serves everybody poorly or a lesser number of people served well. I mean, here we talk, in the ACT context, we talk about it, the rapid services versus the suburban services. The rapid services do a good service, but not for everybody. We can do suburban services, which will get close to everybody, but they're not going to get close to everybody very often. I mean, this is a choice that every government ends up making, and this is a choice clearly where efficiency and equity do not always agree. I mean, if you're talking about bums on seats, cheapest bums on seats, it's the rapid routes. But that gets more of us going places on buses, and that's great. But then there are people, as Ms Lee and Mr Parton have highlighted, who will not be served by this approach. And so most cities, like Canberra, adopt some sort of multimodal approach. You have high-frequency, high-capacity trunk routes, rail or express bus lines, and low-frequency support services, and these are almost always bus routes. And we are making that clearer with the light rail, but we've had the beginnings of the rapid network with the 300s and 200s for some time. Unfortunately, it seems the only proven solution to the conflict is to be an older city. If your city was built before, say, 1900, your city would have been built with walking in mind. These are the so-called human-scale cities, places like New York, Tokyo, most European capitals, even inner cities, Sydney and Melbourne, are built to a certain density, varied mix of residential, commercial and industrial zones, so people can walk to where they want to. Human-scale cities do public transport, density is high, there are good places that you can walk. Residents are already used to walking and cycling and more likely to take public transport, especially if they don't own a car. My daughter lived for many years in Hanover. In Germany, she didn't own a car and her friends didn't own a car. Nobody owned cars. But Canberra isn't a human-scale city. It's basically a car-scale city, which is one of our major transport challenge. We are changing this, however. Some of our developments haven't been as good as we might have liked, but the densification of Civic and along the Northbourne corridor should help to get people out of their cars and onto our footpaths. And the revitalisation of Hague Park and Greenwood Place will both help to make a human-scale corridor in the inner north. Likewise, the $300 million for active... Sorry, not $300 million. In my dreams, that's probably what we should spend, the $30 million for active transport. The ACT Greens negotiated the parliamentary agreement will start to pay dividends over this term, supporting cyclists and pedestrians to get to work, to school and the shops. I was just looking at Pedal Power's newsletter, and they were looking like, I think they were looking for $128 million to address cycling needs. We need to do more. Looking at the smaller scale, I, as well as the Liberal members, have been contacted by residents who are concerned about the recent changes to bus schedules, particularly the elderly residents of the inner south. While to many of us a minor scheduling change or route change may seem inconsequential, and it could be inconsequential at the macro scale compared to improving bus reliability or improving access for a majority of potential bus users, these changes can impact people in real and meaningful ways. I'm not advocating for a moment for stopping the changes towards the rapid network. The changes proposed are sensible, and this is one of the real pluses of the My Way data. We at last have enough data to see where people start, where they transfer, where they're going to, and design a system which is actually going to work for a lot of people. But we have to acknowledge that these changes won't work for everybody, and there are and even if overall the changes are positive, there are some people for whom the changes are not positive. In Narrabundah, which we've talked about at some length, the change from a local bus service to the Green Rapid has left a number of regular bus users, people with mobility issues, children, elderly people, people with disability, having to walk possibly a lot further or possibly wait a lot longer for their bus in terms of transit times between moving from one to another. And, for some people, this is not a big issue. They are physically capable of walking, or the timetable works for them. But that's not the case for all residents. Some of them can't walk that sort of distance, and some of them the wait time and it becomes prohibitive. And for all of us who are bus users, I think we actually need to be considerate of the amount of time that it takes to travel using bus. I mean, Mr Parton's example of 4 hours, 2.5 hours each way was extraordinary, and I didn't realise it would be quite that bad. But we have to take it quite seriously how long people take to do a fairly normal bus trip. I mean, it's only 3.5 hours on the bus from Canberra to Sydney as the other way of looking at it. But that, of course, is a rapid bus, and it only stops at the two ends. But, given there are complaints, reasonable complaints about the reduction of the coverage suburban services, it's important that the government this year, as part of the parliamentary agreement, has committed to, and in fact already has, expanded the flexi-bus service to Inner North. The flexi-bus cannot replace the independence, regularity and familiarity of the local bus service, and of course many people, fortunately from their point of view, are not people for whom the flexi-bus service is an option, because they are simply too not vulnerable enough. They're simply independent enough, but this is an option for our more vulnerable residents, and I think it is really great and vital that it is available. I'll talk about one very current issue that no one else has talked about as yet. As a regular bus user, and as a regular bus runner too, because I'm always running late, and I was really pleased when Transport Canberra announced the policy of rear door boarding. This was announced in estimates, and the Minister confirmed it, and great. And I observed that this happened for a while, and slowly the stickers were being removed. However, in the last couple of weeks, this has changed. I and other passengers have been told that rear door boarding has been cancelled. So I guess the question that I would like to ask the Minister, unfortunately, isn't here, but hopefully one of her staff is listening, is what is happening with the rear door boarding policy? Is it temporary glitch? Are bus drivers voting with their door controls and saying, nope, we don't want you coming in the back? Or has the policy changed? Please, Minister Fitzharris, let us know the answer to this vital bus question.
Being all the speakers, You have 5 minutes.
Okay,
Mrs.
fine.
Kickett.
German speech, fine, yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Assistant Speaker. I am delighted that Mr Parton brought this matter of public importance before the Assembly this afternoon, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to it for a few moments. Recently, I spoke with a 13-year-old girl who is a student at one of our ACT public schools in the Belconnen area. She explained to me that since the latest changes to the Transport Canberra timetables, she now has to walk to school every morning. Previously, she was able to take the bus, but now her only choices are an early bus that gets her to the school before the doors even open, meaning she has to wait around outside regardless of the weather, or a late bus that arrives after her first class starts. Madam Assistant Speaker, I share with the Assembly the difficulty that this young public school student now faces getting to school each day in order to highlight how essential it really is to have good public transport for all areas of Canberra. I worry sometimes that those of us in this chamber who make the decisions sometimes forget what it's like to be completely reliant on public transportation. For very many Canberrans, this subject is indeed a matter of public importance. To further highlight this point, I wish to share a few more public transportation concerns that constituents have shared with me. A number of residents in Latham has raised with me the difficulty they have accessing Transport Canberra buses on the weekends. On weekends, the bus route includes Macrossan Crescent, but the weekend service completely skips over this loop. This means that the nearest bus stop to residents who live in or near this crescent is located more than 1 kilometre away in Onslow Street. For an older child or younger adult, this is an estimated 16 to 20-minute walk. But a number of older Canberrans who live in this area of Latham, Madam Assistant Speaker, and they have told me that the hike to Onslow Street is just too far for someone using a walking stick or a walking frame, or even just for someone whose gait is unsteady or whose joints are a bit stiff. Lack of a good public transportation option leaves these seniors socially isolated each weekend. Worries about confusing and often reduced weekend bus service is, in fact, one of the more common concerns that I hear from constituents in my electorate of Ginninderra. Others have shared with me, for example, their frustration with the fact that the Blue Rapid 300 bus travels from Tuggeranong to Kippax on weekdays, but not on weekends. This exact same route terminates at Belconnen, requiring passengers to transfer to another route, including the waiting that entails. I realise that many of those who work in this building do so reliably Monday through Friday, but many Canberrans do not. Nurses, shop assistants, servers, aged care workers, cooks, disability workers, and so many others work across the entire 7-day week, often with rosters that are constantly changing. Many of them have shared that the weekday and weekend bus routes and timetables are so different that they have to master basically 2 different bus networks, and sometimes getting to or from work on a weekend simply isn't possible. One West Belconnen resident said that he had to give up his much-needed weekend shifts because the only way home afterward was in a taxi, which took nearly all of the money he earned by working that shift. Just this morning, Madam Deputy Speaker, I heard from another Canberra resident who has given up on public transportation entirely. She previously used Transport Canberra bus to get to and from work, a distance of not quite 8 kilometres. The trip used to take her a maximum of 20 minutes. Now, with the latest network changes, her travel time comes in at just under an hour. This woman thankfully has the option of using private transportation and so can continue working. But for a number of reasons, she would prefer not to be adding to the congestion on Canberra's roads or the pollution in our air. For this woman who wishes to do the right thing, I wish for Beck Cody that you mentioned before that the public transportation has improved. I wish you to tell these people, for all the shift workers and those who work on weekends who struggle with public transportation, that transportation has improved. I wish you to tell the elderly who find 1 kilometre hike to a bus stop just...
Order. The time for the matter of public importance has expired.
Okay, thank you.
Mr Gentleman.
Speaker, I move the Assembly do now adjourn.
The question is that the Assembly do now adjourn. Ms Lee.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On 11 October, I was very proud to participate in Plan Australia's Girls Takeover program, where a young future woman leader was going to be able to take over my role as an elected Member of Parliament. I acknowledge Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Ms Lauder, Mrs Jones, Minister Berry, Ms Chain and Ms Lakuta, who also allowed a girl to take over their roles. I know that Ms Chain spoke about this on Tuesday in adjournment, and it was a speech very beautifully written by Linda, I think it was, who took over her role. Unfortunately, unlike Ms Chain, I did not have the foresight to get my speech written for me, so I will try and do my best in my own words. That's right. Ashley Streeter, who was with me for the day, along with Caitlin Figueredo, who Ms Chain and I have previously spoken about in this chamber, were the amazing young women that organised for the girls to take over the ACT Legislative Assembly and Parliament House. Starting with breakfast at the Assembly and, of course, being put on the spot to make a short speech, preparing a briefing note for a bill coming up for debate, a mobile office at the Narrabundah shops, and writing a speech for a new Uni Lodges Valete was all in a day's work for Ashley. I did also bravely hand over my Twitter account over to Ashley, who had no hesitation whatsoever in tweeting away everything she was doing that day. I think that as an Assembly, we were all proud to be the first Parliament in Australia and indeed the Commonwealth to achieve a female majority and show the world that, like on the postcard that hangs on my office pinboard as a daily reminder, a woman's place is in Parliament. I thank Ashley and Caitlin for their dedication in creating opportunities, mentoring and inspiring young girls that nothing should be out of their reach. I'm so glad that Ashley and Caitlin also came back to the Assembly on Monday this week for the CWP Step Up event hosted by Madam Speaker and Mrs Jones, so it looks like they weren't deterred by having played MLA for a day. On Friday the 13th of October, Ms Chain and I were also privileged to participate in the Twitter agenda chat, where we were asked questions such as, how can we engage young people in the political process and remove token partnerships, and what are your top 3 tips for young women wanting to be a leader? It was a fast-moving chat requiring fast-moving fingers and an even faster-moving brain, and if some of the responses that Ms Chain and I provided in that chat inspires even one young woman to pursue life as a parliamentarian, then I think we can be pretty happy with that. As the oldest of 3 girls in my family with a feminist father, I know that I am lucky. I am lucky that I was given every opportunity from a young age to reach my fullest potential. I am lucky that it was instilled in me from a young age that nothing is out of my reach. And I am lucky that my good health, access to world-class education and opportunities to engage with my community have allowed me to stand here today. But there are so many young girls who do not have those opportunities or encouragement, and programs like Girls Takeover are important to reach these girls and young women, to show them that they are valued by the community they strive to serve. And so I say to any girl or young woman who is even considering dreaming about a leadership role in our community, go for it. Because you have so much to give, and we, as a community, have so much to gain from you.
The question is the Assembly to now adjourn. Ms Chain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise today to encourage any Canberran who has not yet returned their marriage equality postal survey to do so, and to do so by tomorrow. There's been an incredible response to the survey, with 3 out of 4 Australians having had their say. But we know younger Australians are underrepresented in that figure, and I put a special call out to them. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's frankly abhorrent that we are being surveyed on a fundamental human right, judging other people's relationships and their right to marry. It has been an incredibly difficult period for a large part of our community, our friends, family, and our colleagues. But it is happening, and the best response is an overwhelming response of yes. Madam Deputy Speaker, as you know, I've been very clear in my support. I've door-knocked, attended rallies and held street stalls. Sometimes I've been more subtle or symbolic in my support, such as wearing a pin. I've expanded my earring collection, stickers, posters, flags and magnets and more. I'm very grateful to the Marriage Equality Campaign and especially to the union movement for their support with many of this material. Madam Deputy Speaker, I accept that on occasion I have pushed the boundaries in my support and my symbolism, but I've also tried to be respectful. However, particularly over recent weeks, I found myself targeted with comments, and also there's been the removal without my knowledge until I've later discovered it of some of my material. And I know that it is nothing. It doesn't even scratch the surface compared to what the LGBTIQ community is facing every day. But I certainly didn't expect that rainbows would cause people so much offence. And frankly, it's made me feel like absolute rubbish when I've discovered what's been happening. But in some ways, I'm glad it's happened, because this small insight and how I've felt about it has given me some understanding of what the LGBTI community goes through every day and has been going through for decades. And I pay tribute to their resilience, grace and determination for decades, but also over this protracted period of debate over this survey. Of course, amongst the awfulness, there have been moments of real beauty, and I've spoken about some of them before in this place, but I want to mention today something that happened at 8:10 a.m. one Friday morning. A group of Canberrans were gathered in the city interchange, not to meet friends or grab a coffee or even to catch a bus. Instead, they were waiting to welcome a bus. Choir, spelt with a Q, is a community choir for LGBTIQ people and allies. The choir brings people together to share the joy of singing while challenging stereotypes. They aim to use music to build a bridge between the queer and non-queer communities in Canberra. And that morning, choir was welcoming one of Canberra's 2 rainbow buses. And as the bus turned into the interchange, they launched into their incredibly stirring rendition of Philip Phillips' Home. The message of that song is that you are not alone. Don't pay any mind to the things that fill you with fear, that we are going to make this place your home. I imagine it would be quite nerve-wracking breaking into song in the middle of the bus interchange, but choir's music rung through the streets, strong and proud. Passers-by broke into huge grins and many pulled out their phones, as I did, to capture the amazing display. And the power and happiness of this song was infectious, as the singers put their arms around each other, danced and clapped and cried, bringing the song to life and brightening a chilly moment. It made me very proud as a member of this government to see that choir could welcome a rainbow bus into the station. It may only be a bus, but I think it served as a much greater symbol to the members of choir that morning who were brave enough to take to the street singing. That bus represented the ACT government's support for them and for the marriage equality cause. Most importantly, I want to acknowledge the many people who've stopped to talk to me and share their stories. The man who told me he was waiting for his partner to return from a trip so they could post their yes votes together. The woman who wanted to see her nephew get married but couldn't because he had to do it overseas. The countless people who've told me about their friend or relative who's been in a same-sex relationship for decades and deserves their right to marry. And the man who follows me on Twitter who stopped me in the street the other day to say he will never forget this government's support during one of the most difficult periods of his life. To each and every one of these individuals, I say thank you, and to everyone else I say, please post your survey and make it a yes.
The question is the Assembly to now adjourn. Mr Parton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish to, in the first instance, as Shadow Gaming and Racing Minister, extend my congratulations, and I would think the congratulations of the entire Assembly, to the connections of the locally trained horse Single Gaze for running second in the Caulfield Cup, and wish Nick Olive and Kathy O'Hara and all of the connections, I think most of who are in Canberra, all the best of luck as they take on the Melbourne Cup from here in Canberra, which is just awesome. So congrats to all those involved in Single Gaze. I wish to also update the Assembly on the progress of the Community Values Syndicate. Of course, I announced it in this chamber late in the day on Tuesday, and to refresh people, Mr Ramsey, the Regulatory Services Minister, asserts that this Labor Greens government is banning greyhound racing here in the ACT because it's out of step with community values. Now, this is despite, Madam Deputy Speaker, there being no evidence of animal welfare breaches at all involving the Canberra Greyhound Racing Club, and despite the fact that there is no public money going to greyhound racing. The government will continue to receive an estimated $220,000 per year from the turnover of greyhound racing, but is not directing a single cent to the sport. So it's all about community values, but there doesn't seem to be any evidence around to suggest that greyhound racing is out of step with community values. And so in the interests of providing clarity, in the interests of assisting the Minister on assessing community perceptions towards greyhound racing, I announced the opening of the Community Values Racing Syndicate 2 days ago. The syndicate will race a greyhound in this region. He is adorable. He doesn't have a racing name as yet. We call him Nugget. He is as black as night, and he loves cuddles and watching TV on the lounge. We call him Nugget because he looks like black shoe polish in the shape of a dog. $300 per share, 20 available. Surely, when you consider the Minister's assertions that greyhound racing is out of step with community values, surely the syndicate was going to struggle to find those 20 people to put their money where their mouth is. It took less than an hour for Tanya, the syndicate manager, to fill the 20 places, and my information is that 100 places could have been found. And this is the sort of response that we got from those putting their hand up. This is an email from one of those. I am 100% on board, never owned a greyhound, never been interested in greyhound racing, however totally against what the ACT government has done in this instance and the way they've gone about it. I suppose, like many others, I've been one of the silent majority right behind you guys, but sitting on the fence. The clincher yesterday was listening to the union guy on radio, weaseling his way out of doing anything substantial for the workers in the greyhound industry. So that's from one of those who's put their hand up. And that's the sort of feedback that the syndicate's getting. The silent majority has been watching and they don't like what they see. It's my understanding that paperwork's being completed now to register the syndicate. Tanya and Leslie tell me that Nugget should be on his way to Canberra by the end of next week. Good job, Canberra.
The question is the Assembly do now adjourn. Ms Lakuta.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would also like to talk about the International Day of the Girl Child and the takeover of the ACT Legislative Assembly that occurred on the 11th of October. 5 young women took over, attending various meetings and learning from them their assigned MLAs. And yes, I was one of the people who had the fortunate foresight to ask if my young woman who would like to take over a speech writing, and she did, which was great. It was absolutely fantastic to see the Greens, the Labor Party and the Liberal Party all take women into their offices. This reflects our strong tripartisan commitment to gender equity, which is also evident from the 50-50 representation of women and men in the Legislative Assembly itself. Bronzy McHenry is the young woman who took over my office for the day. Aside from the fact she has written this speech, our day consisted of various meetings and discussions about a finding of the Dream Gap report, which Plan International released to coincide with the day. This report investigated girls' experiences of inequality, their ambitions and their views of gender stereotypes. Of the 1,745 girls aged 10 to 17 who participated in the survey, almost all, 98%, said they received unequal treatment to boys. Almost all, 93%, said it would be easier to get ahead in life if they were not judged on their appearance. Perhaps most worryingly, the report showed that as girls get older, their confidence decreases dramatically. While 56% of girls view themselves as confident at 10, only 27% do when they reach adulthood. In addition to the 3 recommendations outlined in the report, which are intended to tackle the gender inequity referenced by the 98% of girls who participated, Bronte and I discussed a proposal of hers which related to the Australian curriculum. Currently, there are 3 cross-curriculum priorities: Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures, Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia, and sustainability. These priorities were identified as crucial if the Australian curriculum is to be relevant to the lives of students and address the contemporary issues they face. Bronte and I discussed the possibility of a 4th priority, a gender priority. This priority, like the other 3, would be comprised of 3 key concepts. The first key concept would be to explore the history of the women's movement and the current state of girls' and women's rights around the world. The second key concept could explore gender as a concept, unpacking it and presenting it as a social construct. Gender would be shown as useful, especially for identifying inequality, but by no means a determining factor of success. The third key concept could be aimed at building the capabilities for thinking and acting in ways that are necessary to create a more gender equitable future. This could link into respectful relationships, consent, debunking gender stereotypes, and teaching every child that they are just as capable and entitled to reach their dreams as everyone else. Over next year, Bronte will be talking with relevant stakeholders about the feasibility of this fourth priority. She'll be creating resources and implementing gender priority into the curriculum of preschools, primary schools and high schools in the ACT who are willing to participate. An independent agency will then be employed to determine whether these changes have had a positive impact. If there is a positive impact, as we expect there will be, Bronte will look for our support in pushing to make gender a nationally implemented cross-curriculum priority. I don't think there is anyone here today who wouldn't want girls and boys to feel they're being treated equally and to be treated equally well. And making gender a cross-curriculum priority will ensure that each subject, each class, each cohort and each school is influenced by gender-positive messages. If we want every young girl to feel she can reach her dreams and then actually reach them, we need learning environments which are equally accessible for all. I intend to stay in touch with Bronte and support her in any way I can. I wholeheartedly support her proposal of introducing gender as a cross-curricular priority in the Australian curriculum. I hope that when the time comes we can all come together again, as we did on the 11th of October, and stand behind a proposal that would foster a more gender equitable Australia.
The question is the Assembly do now adjourn. Mr Steele.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is with pride that I rise to speak for the final time before the Marriage Equality Postal Survey closes. We are fortunate to live in an inclusive city, and I'm incredibly proud of the positive stance that our government has taken in supporting inclusion and marriage equality. Since my election to the Assembly last year, I've stood alongside our government to foster inclusion and our LGBTI-friendly city. During this campaign, I've been vigorously campaigning to ensure people post their surveys and encourage everyone to support marriage equality. Filled many shopping centre stalls, made countless calls with hundreds of volunteers from all walks of life who have been involved in this positive equality campaign. And twice, Michael Pedersen and I have braved the cold weather and took to Canberra's thriving nightlife and civic to help enrol some of the almost 6,000 young Canberrans who have enrolled for the first time to vote, and also to remind them to return their postal survey before tomorrow. No matter where I've been on this campaign, I've been met with an overwhelming level of support for marriage equality. But now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the time is almost up for all Canberrans to have their own say on making Canberra more inclusive. Surveys must be submitted by tomorrow, the 27th of October. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, 74.5% of all Australians have recognised how absolutely important this decision will be and have submitted their survey forms in the post already, but 25% haven't. If you know someone that still has their form in their bag and hasn't yet submitted it, whether it's on the fridge or on the kitchen bench, ready to post, the time runs out tomorrow. Submit it, submit your survey, visualise your local post box and make a plan to go down there and post it. Now, Madam Speaker, 18 to 34-year-olds are the strongest supporters of marriage equality, but we know that 40% of them haven't voted. So my call out is to young people in Canberra. This is your last chance to make once-in-a-lifetime generational change. Submit your ballot and contribute to a fairer Australia, a place where all Australians can share in the same dignity and status under law as everyone else. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we knew that this postal survey was going to be divisive and hurtful, and it has been. We knew that the No campaign would throw out as many red herrings as they could, and they have. They've talked about everything else but marriage, but they didn't really have a rational argument against marriage equality in the first place. The harmful effects of this debate have been especially felt on the LGBTIQ community. This was affirmed in mid-September when it was reported that there's been a 20% spike in LGBTI support services and the number of people that have been accessing those since the postal survey began. As the Chief Minister has previously stated, it is an appalling concept for people to have their relationship open to debate or judgment, but it is something that we must participate in to ensure that we see equality in the ACT and across Australia. And we owe these people that have had their lives, their relationships and their families come under attack to participate, to submit our surveys, to vote yes and make sure that our relatives and our friends and co-workers vote yes as well. We must all remain positive that equality will finally come after these last few weeks of the survey. And of course, if we win, we must take a moment to celebrate as well. Attention will then turn to the federal parliament to get these laws through. And unfortunately, the red herrings that the No campaign has been peddling have already turned to the future marriage legislation. But we already have a perfectly good bill in the federal parliament that should be supported immediately. We cannot allow the Tony Abbotts of the world, who wouldn't ever vote for marriage equality, regardless of the content of any legislation, to entrench discrimination in a bill. The losers don't get to dictate terms. They outsourced that responsibility when they initiated this wasteful and divisive survey in the first place. But I also believe that if we want to send a message to Tony Abbott, all of us must make sure that we submit our survey forms tomorrow.
The question is, the Assembly do now adjourn. Stephen Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak on the importance of Children's Week, but I'd like to start by endorsing the comments of my colleagues Ms Chain and Mr Steele. Children's Week is a national celebration of children's rights, talents and citizenship. We hold Children's Week around Universal Children's Day, which is marked on the 4th Wednesday of October in Australia. This Children's Week, of course, also marks the 10th anniversary of the establishment of the Children and Young People Commissioner in the ACT. I was very pleased to be able to attend the birthday party at Woden Youth Centre on Tuesday. It was particularly great to be there with a bunch of 10-year-olds who had a great time engaging in creative activities that express their wishes for the future of Canberra and their own lives in another 10 years' time. The theme of this year's Children's Week is that education has the power to transform children's lives. It is an appropriate time to reflect on the programs that enable Canberra's kids to make a great start in their learning journey to ensure they have the best possible chance of living a great life. I was fortunate to attend this year's launch of the On My First Day book with the Deputy Chief Minister and Minister for Education, Yvette Berry, a couple of weeks ago. On My First Day has been a highly successful ACT government initiative over recent years, and we welcomed On My First Day being available again to support children who will start kindergarten in 2018. The On My First Day book contains messages and drawings from children to children about what it's like to start school. Around 7,000 Canberra children entering kindergarten in 2018 will get a copy. Children who are quoted in the book say the first day can make you feel nervous, happy, scared. Happy because I made new friends. Or you might have butterflies and feel excited. There's also great practical advice for children and parents to help them prepare for the transition to kindergarten. The book is included in a transition pack distributed to government, independent and Catholic preschools, libraries, community agencies and through child and family centres. The Transition Pack is a joint project between the Community Services Directorate, the Education Directorate and Libraries ACT, and it's a really great example of our directorates working together. The government continues to support other innovative and useful programs to help kids and their families in moments of transition to education. This month, the Prep for Pre program is being rolled out across the 4 ACT school networks. It's a great example of how the ACT government uses data and works collaboratively to deliver better services. Developed in response to data from the Australian Early Development Census and from West Belconnen Child and Family Centre, the program is a targeted transition to preschool program. It is designed to work with those families who may need extra support to ensure their kids make the best start in preschool. Drawn from both the Education and Community Services Directorates, team members include a child and family worker, 2 preschool teachers, a speech therapist, a physiotherapist and an occupational therapist. This multidisciplinary approach helps children build their understanding and confidence to start school through directly experiencing an early childhood program, whilst parents and carers receive practical advice on how they can support a smooth transition for their children to preschool. Following a trial last year, the Prep for Pre program was found to increase families' understanding of preschool, reduce parents and carers' concerns about their children's readiness, and equip parents and carers to make better decisions about starting preschool, amongst other benefits. Most importantly, the program links parents and carers to appropriate early intervention services, assists therapists to identify possible developmental concerns in a preschool setting, and aligns with the broader goal of ensuring that Canberrans can receive better support when it matters. I will be attending the final Prep for Pre session in November, and it'll be great to hear of the progress kids and families have made through the program. Prep for Pre and On My First Day are just two ways the ACT Government makes a challenging time for kids, parents and carers easier. To all members of the Assembly and the Canberra community, happy Children's Week.
The question is excuse me, that the Assembly do now adjourn. Those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The Assembly stands adjourned until Tuesday the 31st of October at 10 a.m.